I never thought my life would unravel over a holiday table beneath flickering candles and the scent of cinnamon. My name is Stephanie. I'm 34 years old, and for 15 years I believed my marriage was unshakable, even when the cracks began to show. I had built my life around my husband's rhythms, his moods, his smirks. Somewhere along the way, I lost the sound of my own voice. Looking back now, I can see how it began long before Christmas, long before divorce papers became a weapon wrapped in a cruel joke. It began with laughter, his laughter always sharp, always at my expense. "You know I could leave you tomorrow, right?" Brandon would say at dinner parties, his hand casually resting on my shoulder, his eyes twinkling with false affection. Guests chuckled, I chuckled too. But inside I shriveled. The words cut deeper than they seemed, like tiny blades dipped in honey. Each remark reminded me that my worth was a punchline in his story. I stopped wearing the red dress he mocked. I stopped finishing sentences that he would twist into jokes. I smiled for appearances, but inside I was folding myself smaller, making myself invisible so I wouldn't embarrass him. Brandon never raised his hand, never shouted. He didn't need to. His control was quieter, sharper, more humiliating. "Don't embarrass me in front of my boss. You're lucky I'm still here. What would you even do without me?" He spoke with a grin, a clink of his whiskey glass. I smiled back because that was my role. Smiling, excusing, absorbing. To my friends, I defended him. "He's just sarcastic." But Jenny, my childhood best friend, saw through it. "He doesn't have to mean it," she said softly. "You look like you're disappearing." Maybe I was. I stopped answering my sister's calls. I stopped posting pictures online. My world shrank until it revolved around Brandon, his routines, his anger, his unpredictable humor. Marriage, I told myself, wasn't a fairy tale. At least he didn't cheat. At least he wasn't violent. At least. But then came the gala. He had been drinking that night. His eyes glazed when he leaned close and muttered, "You're just like the rest of them, needy, clingy, always wanting more." Shame rose hot on my cheeks, and I stayed silent, just like always. When we got home, he slammed the door, stumbled to the liquor cabinet, and poured himself another glass. I followed with careful steps, handed him a drink, and whispered a line that would change my life forever. "Maybe we should sign something just in case. You always joke about leaving. Why not make it official?" He laughed, careless and cruel. "You really think I need a prenup to protect my fantasy football winnings?" Then, drunk and smug, he grabbed a napkin, scribbled his name, and tossed it aside. By morning he forgot. I didn't. Jenny helped me notarize that napkin within 24 hours. She didn't ask questions, she just looked at me with quiet understanding and handed me a pen. That piece of paper became my lifeline, hidden in a fireproof envelope, tucked away with tax receipts, scanned and saved under a private email. Brandon thought he was untouchable. He had no idea the knife he handed me could one day be turned back toward him. From then on, I watched differently. I began to record the little humiliations, the receipts left in his pockets, the late nights that reeked of perfume and tequila. Valentine's Day, he claimed he was on a work trip. I found a hotel bill with strawberries and wine for two. I didn't confront him. I logged it, saved it. He joked to his friends that if we split, I'd come crawling back because I couldn't even fix the Wi-Fi without him. I nodded, smiled, poured him another drink. But in my heart, something had shifted. I became his mirror. He saw only what he wanted to see. A wife who laughed at his jokes, toasted his promotions, stayed quiet when he insulted her. He didn't notice I was sharpening myself in silence, building an archive of evidence in patience. I bought a plain spiral notebook hidden under the mattress, where I marked his lies with dots and his late returns with X's. To anyone else it looked like meal plans, to me it was a map. And then 2 weeks before Christmas, I found the final confirmation. He fell asleep with his phone unlocked, messages lighting the screen. "She doesn't suspect a thing. I'll file on Christmas. Want front row seats?" A laughing emoji followed like my life was a party trick. His best friend Nate replied with glee. They thought I would crumble. They thought I was predictable. That night I lay beside him staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding steady like a war drum. He believed he'd orchestrated my downfall. What he didn't know was that the stage he had chosen for my humiliation would become the stage for his own undoing. Because when you hand someone a knife, you don't get to be surprised when they finally learn how to use it. The days leading up to Christmas carried a strange electricity. The house glittered with garlands and lights, Brandon humming holiday tunes while carving into a roast or pouring another drink. He was smug, almost buoyant, like a man who had already won. His best friend Nate visited often, their laughter echoing from the living room. They thought I was blind, deaf, fragile. I moved through the house like a ghost hostess, smiling when necessary, nodding in the right places, my eyes unreadable. Inside, though, every nerve in me was alive, bracing, waiting. It's strange how silence can become a weapon. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I didn't slam doors or tear up evidence. I let the silence stretch until it became the stage on which he revealed himself. My journal grew thick with entries. Receipts, screenshots, overheard phone calls, small humiliations scribbled down like a soldier recording enemy movements. My spiral notebook became a war diary. Jenny helped me reinforce the prenup. We met in her office, the fluorescent lights buzzing, as she slid on her glasses and tapped her pen against the document Brandon had once scribbled in drunken arrogance. "It's airtight," she whispered, admiration in her tone. "He gave you the knife. All you have to decide is when to use it." "I don't want revenge," I confessed, my voice brittle. "I just want to feel safe." "You will," she promised. So I rehearsed. Quietly. Secretly. Each dinner party where Brandon mocked my spending habits became practice. For the moment I would no longer flinch. Each smug remark about how I couldn't survive without him became fuel for the fire I held close to my chest. He thought I was softening. He thought the fight in me had died. What he didn't see was the steel beneath my skin. One night as I folded laundry, I found a receipt tucked into his jeans pocket. Lipstick, temptress red. I traced the letters with my thumb, no tears, no trembling. Just another entry in my evidence log. That was the night I stopped pretending I was naive. That was the night I knew exactly how I'd take my power back. 2 weeks before Christmas, I stared at the message thread on his phone, the one that mocked me, the one that made my humiliation a holiday bet. "She'll cry. She'll crumble." Nate had written it. Brandon replied with a laughing emoji. Their confidence was intoxicating, almost comforting. Let them underestimate me. Let them laugh. Christmas Day arrived wrapped in glittering lights and false warmth. Brandon's parents sat at the table, his mother's pearls catching the flicker of candlelight, his father carving slices of turkey with the solemnity of a patriarch. My sister Beth passed around spiced wine cheeks, flushed eyes soft with kindness. Nate, already tipsy, whispered something into Brandon's ear. Brandon smirked, tapped his glass with a butter knife. "All right," he announced. "Before dessert I have something special for my lovely wife." Beth's smile widened with anticipation, expecting jewelry, or perhaps a love letter. My stomach twisted, not with fear, but with anticipation. Brandon reached into his blazer and pulled out a plain white envelope. "Merry Christmas, babe," he said smugly, placing it in front of me. Nate chuckled. No one else laughed. The room hushed. My fingers touched the envelope, steady and unshaking. I opened it slowly, deliberately, and read the words, "Petition for dissolution of marriage." Already signed. Already filed. He had even highlighted a section like a child proud of his homework. I looked up. His grin was wide, expectant. So I smiled back. "Thank you," I whispered sweetly. Confusion flickered across his face. Nate shifted uncomfortably. I reached into my clutch, pulled out a sleek silver pen and signed the papers with a flourish. I dated it, capped the pen and slid the envelope back across the table. "That's it?" Brandon asked, his voice too casual. "That's it," I echoed. The room was still. Beth's eyes widened in shock. His parents stared in disbelief. Brandon smirked, thinking he had won. And then with calm precision I reached under the table and placed a gold-wrapped box in front of him. "What's this?" he asked. "Your real gift," I said softly. He tore the paper, laughing as though this were another of his jokes. But when he opened the leather folder, the color drained from his face. His lips parted, moving silently as he reread the notarized prenup he had signed a year earlier, reinforced, updated, and filed. This doesn't count, he stammered. It does, I replied, my voice calm as a blade. You filed, yes, but I filed first. Under your own terms. Gasps rippled through the table. Nate's smirk dissolved into ash. His parents sat frozen, horror etched across their faces. Brandon clutched the document, his arrogance collapsing into disbelief. And then I reached into my purse again. One more thing, I said. I placed a small square envelope beside his plate. He opened it with trembling hands, revealing a black and white sonogram photo. I'm pregnant, I announced softly. 8 weeks today. For a moment a smile broke across his face, involuntary, hopeful. But then it faltered, twisted into panic as his brain caught up. Prenup, pregnancy, custody, assets. Every weapon he thought he controlled now turned against him. You planned this, he whispered, his voice strangled. I met his eyes, steady as steel. No, Brandon. I didn't plan. I prepared. The silence after my words spread like frost across the table, thin and glittering and deadly. Brandon sat with the prenup in one hand and the sonogram in the other, as if holding both could somehow fuse them into a story where he still came out the hero. Around us, the ornaments on the tree stopped their tiny shivers. The candles steadied, and the only sound left was the soft clink of a spoon from the kitchen. I watched the certainty leave his posture, slip from his jaw, drain from his eyes. He had always believed consequences were optional, reserved for people who didn't know how to talk their way out of a corner. Tonight, he met the corner he built. His phone buzzed against the wood, a flat insect hum that made him jump. He read the email, Jenny's name on the screen. The firm's letterhead, the words legally binding, and his fingers tightened around the device like it might sprout a solution if he squeezed hard enough. Another buzz. Another subject line routed through his father's inbox, forwarded proof upon proof. He lowered the phone as if it had burned him, and stared at me the way a child stares at a closed door, baffled it won't open when they push. Apple or pecan? I asked Beth, because sometimes dignity looks like deciding you will still eat dessert. She passed the pie with hands that trembled just a little, her thumb pressing around the plate's rim, as if she could anchor us both to something ordinary. I took a bite, and the cinnamon opened like a small window in winter. Peace has a flavor. Mine was warm butter and spice. Brandon's chair scraped back like a protest he didn't have words for. You think you've won, he muttered. But the old edge had gone missing from his voice. I didn't bother to answer. Victory didn't feel like gloating, it felt like air finally reaching the bottom of my lungs. He left the dining room carrying nothing, not the envelope he'd delivered like a trophy, not the prenup, not even the photograph of a new heartbeat. The door shut behind him with a dull thud. Not an ending, just the sound of something heavy placed where it could no longer hurt my hands. For a breathless minute no one spoke. Then Beth exhaled, shaky and honest. I always hated that sweater, she said, and something gentler than laughter moved through the room, a ripple of relief in a place that had been bracing for storm. Brandon's mother covered her mouth with a napkin, pearls trembling at her throat. His father took off his glasses, polishing lenses that were already clean. Nate stared at the tablecloth as if it held instructions for a life he'd never learned to read. I finished my slice of pie, set the fork down, and felt the ground under me stop tilting. Beth stayed the night. We didn't rehash the play-by-play, didn't peel open the same wound for sport. We brushed our teeth, folded into the guest bed like two girls at a sleepover, and fell asleep to the soft thrum of heat through the vents. I woke before dawn to the quiet disappointment of a house that had expected shouting and received truth instead. Downstairs the coffee pot sat cold. His keys were gone. His cologne clung to the plastic of the coat closet like a ghost that didn't know it was unwelcome. I opened a window and let December in. By 9, I was on the phone with a locksmith saying standard change, please actually make it fast, and he arrived by afternoon with a tool belt and kind eyes. He didn't ask questions when I handed over the old keys. When he left, a new key cut a neat crescent against my palm. Ownership is sometimes only a feeling, but it was mine all the same. That evening, I moved back into the master bedroom. I stripped the bed, tied the sheets in a knot, set candles along the dresser, and watched sandalwood light write softer lines across the walls. The room exhaled, and so did I. Jenny called at dusk. Her voice sounded like the first day after fever breaks. "He's just learned what you've been holding," she said, a smile audible through the line. 70% gone overnight. And with a baby on the way, he'll be writing a check so big they'll need a dolly to deliver it. I sat on the edge of my bed and didn't gloat. I simply felt the ache in my ribs unclench. "I'm proud of you," she added, and the words went straight to the place that had been hollow for years. The fallout arrived in snowflakes, not avalanches. A few friends unfollowed, a few chose sides with the ferocity of people who need a myth to worship. Others slipped me notes that read, "I wish I had your courage," or "About time," with a scribbled heart. Around town, people lowered their voices mid-sentence when I entered a room, the way you lower your voice at a museum before a painting that suddenly rearranges your understanding of a color. I learned to walk through their whispers like weather, annoying sometimes but never personal. At home, life softened. I bought lavender soap again. I painted the nursery a quiet sage and strung lights along the window so dusk could find something to land on. Elena moved into the guest room for a while with muffins and chaos, and tender jokes about my villain origin story being an instruction manual for assembling rocking chairs. We laughed until we thumbed tears from the corners of our eyes, the good kind, the kind that says your body finally believes you're safe. One morning in the kitchen slicing peaches for a pie, I would have once apologized for I felt her kick. At first, a whisper, a brush of wing, and then a sure press against the inside of the life I was building. I dropped the knife and caught the counter with one hand, the other already cupping the roundness that contained both of us. "I know," I told her out loud. "Me too." Later, I wrote in my notebook, the one that used to tally wrongs and now recorded vows. "This child will never hear shouting through a door. This child will never mistake fear for love." I underlined it twice, the way you underline promises you're not willing to let time fade. Sometimes I saw Brandon, a quick silhouette exiting a bank, a fluster at the end of a hallway, a name removed from a newsletter screenshot Jenny sent with a single raised eyebrow emoji. His absence in my house became presence in my body. Deeper sleep, laughter that didn't check the room for permission, the way light looked different on the wall at 3 p.m. when I didn't dread the sound of tires in the driveway. Freedom didn't burst in. It seeped, filling corners first, then the whole room. By the time the tree lot popped up on the corner again, my dining table was smaller, cozier, set not for performance, but for actual appetite. Beth's toddler threw mashed potatoes and then applauded himself. Jenny brought a date who tried to make vegan gravy and failed adorably. The high chair beside my sister's son held my daughter, cheeks pink with winter fingers curling around the tray like she was holding on to her own sunrise. I didn't watch the door. I didn't edit myself into something more palatable. I lifted my mug and said a quiet grace I had written myself, and later by the fire with her asleep on my chest and my heartbeat settling into hers, I finally recognized the sound I'd been missing all those years. It was my voice, steady and low, telling a story where I was not a prop in someone else's magic trick, but the magician who walked herself out of the box. The first Christmas without him was nothing like I imagined it would be. I thought the absence might echo, thought the empty chair at the table would gnaw at me, thought the silence would rattle my bones. But silence, it turned out, was a gift. It was no longer the suffocating quiet of suppressed words, but the gentle hush of peace wrapping itself around me. The dining room glowed with soft lights. Laughter threaded through the air, not sharp or mocking, but whole and genuine. My daughter sat in her high chair babbling to herself, in a language only she understood, her cheeks rosy from the cold. Every sound she made filled the room like music I didn't know I'd been starving for. My sister Beth leaned back in her chair, sipping spiced wine, her toddler tugging at her sleeve. Jenny sat nearby with her new partner, the two of them exchanging glances that held tenderness instead of calculation. There was no Nate, no Brandon, no hollow chuckles at my expense. No sense of being watched or judged or sized down to fit inside someone else's fragile ego. There was only us family chosen, and blood, both pie plates stacked at the end of the table, the smell of pine needles drifting from the tree. I carved the turkey myself this time, clumsy at first, but Beth laughed and called it rustic. No one mocked me. No one turned the moment into a punchline. As the night stretched on, I realized I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. My stomach wasn't tight, my smile wasn't a performance. I wasn't calculating Brandon's mood or bracing myself for his remarks. I was present, fully, quietly, joyously present. I didn't even notice when my daughter fell asleep against my chest, until Jenny reached over and whispered, "She looks just like you when you were a baby." I kissed the top of her head and held her tighter. After everyone left, I tucked her into the crib I'd painted sage green, strung with the lights Elena and I had hung months earlier. The room glowed softly like it was breathing with her. I sat in the rocking chair and listened to her tiny breaths. That was when I let myself cry, not from sorrow, but from the release of years of holding myself so tightly, I forgot what it was to exhale. Later I pulled up the journal I had once used to document Brandon's lies, the late nights, the cruelty. Those pages ended months ago. Now the journal was filled with something new. Plans, dreams, fragments of songs I wanted to teach my daughter, recipes I wanted to try, words I wanted to live by. On the last page I wrote in bold letters, "I will never shrink again." I underlined it twice. There were moments, of course, when the past still tried to whisper. When I saw him across the street, once shoulders slumped, muttering into his phone, eyes darting like a man searching for exits that no longer existed. He didn't see me. Or maybe he did but couldn't meet my gaze. Either way, I kept walking, my baby stroller rolling steadily forward. I heard through others that his reputation at work had crumbled, that Nate no longer laughed as loudly, that the swagger had drained out of both of them. Karma doesn't always roar. It often arrives quietly, like frost creeping across a window pane, until suddenly the whole glass is covered. Brandon had gambled with arrogance, bet on my tears, and lost to my silence. But my life was no longer about him. It was about mornings humming in the kitchen while my daughter played with wooden blocks, about evenings reading stories aloud in voices that made her giggle, about dinners where the only sound was the gentle clatter of forks and laughter bubbling up without fear. I thought revenge would feel sharp, but instead it felt soft. It felt like waking up in a bed where no one mocked the way I breathed. It felt like lighting a candle and not apologizing for the scent. It felt like singing along to the radio without bracing for someone's sigh. Freedom, I realized, isn't loud. It's steady. And sometimes late at night, when the house is quiet and the world is asleep, I walk past the box of old wedding photos stored in the back of the closet. I don't burn them, don't rip them, don't even look at them. I let them sit, gathering dust, irrelevant, because the past no longer defines me. It is just paper, flat, silent, powerless. I am not powerless anymore. I am a mother, a sister, a friend, a woman who rebuilt a home from ruins. And those scars remain. They remind me not of weakness but of survival. They remind me that when he bet on my destruction, he forgot the one truth I now carry everywhere: I am stronger than the storm he tried to drown me in. I leaned over the crib one last time that night, brushed my daughter's cheek and whispered, "You'll never have to wonder if you're enough, you already are." And as the fire flickered low in the hearth, I realized the truest revenge wasn't the prenup, or the silence at the Christmas table, or even the way Brandon's empire cracked. The truest revenge was peace. Peace he could no longer touch, peace he could never destroy, peace that belonged only to me. If this story touched you, if you've ever felt the weight of someone trying to make you small, know that you are not alone. Share this story with someone who needs strength. Like this video if it made you feel less powerless. Subscribe for more stories of resilience, revenge, and rebirth. And please leave a comment below telling me the moment in this story that stayed with you the most. I would love to hear your voice.